For 35 years, I had never considered that a family dinner could undermine all of my convictions. The gentle glow of the vintage chandelier, the flickering candles on the dining table, and the rich aroma of stew that permeates the air. All of it was a meticulously planned ambush. I walked directly into it, without a single iota of suspicion. 2 weeks ago, my mother contacted me, her tone being noticeably more dulcet than it typically is. "Sophia, it has been an extended period since the family has convened for dinner." I hesitated. I had become acclimated to my parents' conditional affection for more than a decade. They only contacted me when they required assistance. However, a part of me continued to harbor the hope that this time would be different. That they genuinely missed me. Therefore, I drove from San Francisco to my childhood home in Sacramento, abandoning my intensive meetings and hectic schedule. I arrived with optimism, however, it was dashed within minutes of my arrival at the table. Something akin to a wine glass slipping from one's grasp and crashing onto the floor. In order to prevent any future misunderstandings, Mom and Dad wished to inform you of the situation at this time. My younger sibling, Parker, articulated himself adeptly, as though he had practiced it. His face scarcely concealed his satisfaction as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Olivia, my younger sister, twirled a golden strand of hair around her finger, a smirk playing on her lips, as if she had just won a grand wager, in close proximity to him. I placed my fork down, as I abruptly discovered that the stew my mother had meticulously prepared was more difficult to consume than ever. "What is the matter?" My voice was parched as I inquired. However, I made an effort to maintain my composure. My mother, who had extended an invitation to my home with the assurance of a pleasant evening, let out a gentle murmur. "Your father and I have reached a consensus regarding our will. Parker and Olivia will inherit our residence, the lakefront villa in Tahoe, and all of our possessions." Her words penetrated the space between us like a knife cutting directly into my thorax. I turned to my father, hoping and imploring that he would deny this, that he would claim it was a cruel joke. However, he did not offer any disagreement, but rather lowered his head and gazed into his glass of wine. I inhaled deeply, endeavoring to identify a logical thread within this chaotic situation. Additionally, for what reason? Parker's voice was tinged with mirth as he shrugged. "Because you do not require it, correct? Is your existence stable? Do you have your own company and home? Olivia and I are perceived as necessitating additional assistance by my parents." "Assistance?" I scoffed, my mirth hollow. "Olivia, could you provide a more detailed definition of support? You are 28 years old and have not been employed for more than 6 months. Parker, how many times have you changed your major during your college career?" 5 or 6. And each tuition fee has been covered by Mom and Dad. My heart was pounding with wrath, and I could feel my breath quicken as I spoke. My mother's gaze was icy as she crossed her arms. "There is no need to overreact, Sophia. We have seriously considered this matter, your father and I. These assets are unnecessary. However, Parker and Olivia require a strong foundation upon which to construct their lives." While I burst into laughter, the situation was devoid of amusement. "A basis? And what about the money I spent assisting you in paying off the mortgage, the times I covered the utility expenses and home repairs? What about the $40,000 I spent on the Tahoe Villa's renovation? Does no one recall that?" Olivia's irises were filled with mockery as she chuckled. "Oh, so you are meticulously monitoring every penny? Sophia, that is disheartening. Is it truly necessary for you to be so frugal, given your wealth?" I gazed at her incredulously, disbelieving her boldness. "Unpleasant?" I underlined each phrase. "Olivia, this is not deception, it is exploitation." The glasses were nearly knocked over when my mother violently struck the table with her hand. "Sophia, it is time to cease your victim mentality, you are perpetually preoccupied with money. We did this not out of a lack of affection for you, but rather out of a deep-seated love for all of our offspring. I love you." I experienced a chilling wrath that permeated my chest. Parker assumed a sympathetic demeanor as he reclined. You are behaving in a manner that is reminiscent of a child who has recently lost their favored toy. Sophia, each individual in this establishment is an adult. It is imperative that you develop the ability to acknowledge and embrace reality. Nothing was said by me. I was no longer enraged by his words, they only served to underscore one realization. Throughout my existence, I had been deceived. They had never truly regarded me as a member of the family. I was not their daughter. Financially, I was their provider. I gradually positioned my palms on the table, firmly grasping the edge of the tablecloth. I exhaled deeply, allowing the wrath to subside. Upon my return, my eyes were ice cold. I now comprehend. I was not required by them, and they were not required by me. I had been under the impression that family was a sanctuary for the past 10 years. That they would hold me in the same regard as I held them, regardless of the circumstances. However, what is the reality? I was not their daughter. I operated an automated teller machine. And now that I was no longer of any use, they were prepared to jettison me without hesitation. I fixed my gaze on the individuals who stood before me. I was contacted by my mother each time a bill was due. My father, the individual who never opposed any of my mother's decisions, even when she treated me unjustly. Parker, the individual who had squandered an inexhaustible quantity of my money on courses that he never completed. Olivia, who had never worked a single day of her life in a serious employment, possessed an abundance of designer clothing that could fill 3 rooms. I laughed, but not out of mirth, my voice was tinged with bitterness. Additionally, what about the funds that I allocated to each of you? Is there anyone who does not believe that this merits any recognition? My mother's gaze was as keen as a razor, as she crossed her arms. Sophia, you consistently discuss money. Nothing is ever sufficient for you, is it? I perceived a sensation of parchedness in my pharynx. Insufficient? I reiterated the statement, nearly muttering. For the past 6 years, I have been responsible for the mortgage payments on this residence. I was the sole individual who took on the loan when you were on the brink of bankruptcy. I also financed the Tahoe Villa's renovations, as you expressed your intention to preserve it as a family asset. Presently, I am not even acknowledged as a member of this family. Olivia raised an eyebrow in feigned indifference as she shrugged. Sophia, you were not coerced by anyone. You simply enjoy portraying the savior. I experienced that sentence as a physical blow to my visage. You are correct, I was not coerced. I gazed into her green eyes, seeking any indication of remorse, but I was met with ridicule. I did it because I believed that family members were obligated to provide support for one another. However, I was mistaken. I was the sole individual who made sacrifices, while the rest of you were only able to accept. Parker snorted. You are behaving in a manner that is reminiscent of a child who has lost their favored toy. The rage in my chest began to accumulate. Is it a toy? I articulated each word, allowing the heat to ascend to my face. Over the past decade, I have allocated nearly $500,000 to assist this family. I denied myself the opportunity to travel, purchase a larger home, or invest in my own future, and instead placed my dreams on hold. In order to free you from the burden of struggle. And now, you are accusing me of greediness solely because I request a modicum of equity? My mother sighed and shook her head, as if I were a foolish child who was incapable of comprehending logic. Sophia, the essence of family is love, not money. I exhaled a hollow chuckle. Are you in love? I examined the chamber in its entirety. The property that I had dedicated a significant amount of time and money to its upkeep. If that were the case, why does affection appear to be significant only when it originates from me? Why am I consistently the one who is required to make sacrifices? No one responded. That inquiry was never addressed. The room was enveloped in a frigid silence, and I could discern it in their gaze. They did not experience any sense of accountability. They did not believe that they had exploited me, rather, they were irritated that I had the audacity to demand equity. I felt a sudden, intense pain in my thorax. Why had I ever entertained the notion that they would undergo a transformation? I exhaled deeply and rose from my seat. The tense atmosphere was punctured by the screeching sound as the chairs scraped against the parquet floor. I replied with a sneer, "I have heard enough. I am finished." My mother blinks. "What did you just say?" I met her gaze, my words being deliberate and sluggish. "I am finished. I am no longer obligated to any of you." Parker laughed, however, his demeanor was marked by uneasiness. "What is the matter? Are you intending to abruptly terminate the family's relationship?" I fixed my gaze on him without wavering. "Indeed. And you will shortly comprehend the precise meaning of that." I stomped my foot, disregarding their response. My mother's voice, which was both sharp and frenzied, echoed behind me. "Sophia, what are you doing? Family is intended to remain united. You are unable to abruptly terminate our conversation due to a minor disagreement." I paused, a smirk curving across my lips. However, this time, the temperature was freezing. A minor disagreement? I repeated the action, and then I turned around, my eyes as hard as steel. "This is not a minor disagreement. This is an act of treachery." I moved quickly toward the door, but my mother's voice rang out one final time, resonating with wrath and caution, before I crossed the threshold. "Do not contemplate returning if you exit that entrance." I refrained from discontinuing. I was not required to return, I had all the necessary information. I experienced a sensation of tightness in my thorax while returning to San Francisco, as if a boulder were pressing down on me. The bitter words from dinner, the disdainful glances from Olivia, Parker's smug smirk, and the suffocating silence of my parents all caused my mind to spin. The streetlights, which extended endlessly along the boulevard, appeared as hollow streaks of light, as the buildings blurred past my vehicle window. I used to refer to that residence as my family, however, what is the case now? It was nothing more than a black void that had absorbed every ounce of my love and effort. Upon my return to my apartment, I disposed of my bag on the couch, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled into the sofa. I let out a protracted exhale. I was unable to maintain my anger any longer. The only remaining sensations were fatigue and fatigue. Subsequently, I initiated my banking application. $2,100 per month. Throughout the years, that was the amount I had been paying for them. The mortgage costs $1,500. Utilities cost $600. Electricity. Water. The internet. Upkeep. Not to mention the additional expenses, such as Parker's tuition, the costly gifts my mother recommended during the holidays, and the excursions they invited me on, which I ultimately had to cover. A wave of betrayal swept through me, burning hot and thick in my larynx. I had invested everything into this family as if I were a fool, but to them, I was merely a wandering wallet. I selected the option to cancel recurring payments. The cancellation was confirmed by the screen flashing. The words were effectively cancelled, and an unfamiliar sense of relief washed over me as I stared at them. It was as though I had just severed an invisible chain that had bound me for years. However, I was aware. They would not relinquish this readily. The initial telephone call occurred the following morning. I disregarded my mother's telephone number. The second contact. The third. The fourth. She maintained her resolve not to surrender. By the fifth day, I had silenced my phone and allowed it to transfer to voicemail. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and reviewed my messages. "Mom, Sophia, I am in awe of your actions. Do you have any clue how much the house is struggling? Mother. Please refrain from being so self-centered. Family members are expected to provide assistance to one another. Mom, please return my call." I abandoned my cup, closed my eyes, and inhaled deeply. I assumed that she had discovered the information by this point. After a few minutes, my phone once more vibrated. This time, it was my father. My heart sank as I gazed at the screen. I would have responded immediately if it had occurred in the past. However, at this time, I was aware that he was not contacting me to defend me. I permitted it to be directed to voicemail. I began to play the message a short time later. Father. Sophia. You should reevaluate your position. Your mother is extremely distressed. It is not permissible to terminate relationships due to a minor miscommunication. We are a family. I exhaled a hollow chuckle. Who is your family? If I were truly a member of your family, for what reason had they never supported me? Olivia contacted me in the afternoon. I refused. Her messages arrived 1 second later. Olivia. Sophia, your behavior is truly pitiful. You are a person who is both egotistical and petty. Olivia, do you truly believe that you are superior to us? You should have declared your unwillingness to assist from the outset, rather than attempting to appear to be the benevolent one. Olivia. Congratulations on your destruction of this family. I was amused. Dry, acrid laughter. Did they truly believe that I was at fault? Subsequently, Parker initiated communication. I responded this time. Me, what? Parker, what are you doing or thinking? I am reclaiming what is rightfully mine. Parker. Sophia, you are repulsive. You have ceased to provide assistance to your parents solely because they did not leave you any inheritance. You are nothing more than a selfish leech. Parker, this is not about money to me, it is about respect, which I have never received from any of you. Parker, you are a venomous serpent. You believe that you can abandon this family without repercussions. Wait until you see the consequences. Before I could continue, he abruptly terminated the conversation. I felt a chill down my spine. They were not going to cease. I gazed at my phone and then at my contact list. The screen illuminated each name, including Olivia, Parker, and their respective parents. Those who had depended on me for their entire lives have now turned against me as soon as I ceased to provide. None of them harbored any remorse. Not one of them expressed an opinion. I apologize. They were only able to provide wrath, threats, and insults. I firmly grasped my phone and then gradually tapped the block number. Their identities gradually dissipated from my contact list. This was the first time in years that I experienced tranquility. I was aware that they would attempt to return, however, I could rest tonight without the burden of their demands and accusations. I placed my phone aside, sipped on a glass of wine, and for the first time in years, I managed to smile. I was unoccupied. A perilous silence prevailed for 3 weeks. Following the barring of their numbers, I experienced an uncommon period of tranquility. There will be no more calls that induce feelings of remorse. There will be no more communications that are laden with blame. There will be no more incessant demands. I concentrated on my work, established new rituals, and, for the first time in years, lived without the oppressive burden of obligation. However, I was not so naive as to believe that it had concluded. I was correct. My phone vibrated violently as I sat in a conference room on Friday afternoon, anticipating a client presentation. A message from my mother. Mom, Sophia, the family is convening for an essential meeting at the old house at 7 p.m. You are required to attend. This is not an invitation, it is your obligation. Family gathering. As I closed my eyes, I felt a surge of irritability. This was not a gesture of benevolence, rather, it was an ambush. I could disregard it. I could continue with my new existence. However, there is a naive aspect of me. A portion of the population continues to harbor a naive belief in miracles. Interested in observing their subsequent actions. I responded with a single word. All right. Parker's BMW and Olivia's garish pink Mini Cooper were already neatly parked in the driveway when I arrived. My mother opened the door almost immediately as I stepped onto the veranda, a fake smile plastered on her face. Sophia, you have finally resolved to return home. I entered the building. The home, which was once so familiar, now felt oppressive. My father maintained an expression of solemnity as he occupied the center of the living room. Parker and Olivia reclined on the settee, their eyes twinkling with satisfaction. There was a significant issue. I sat down, crossed my legs, and folded my arms as I slowly drew out a chair. Consequently, I stated abruptly, "What is the purpose of this?" My father's gaze was acute as he cleared his throat. "We must resolve this tension." I exhaled a dry guffaw. "Is there tension? What do you mean by the fact that I ceased to pay for all of you?" My mother endeavored to maintain a soothing tone in her voice as she exhaled. "Sophia, your reaction was excessive. Your father and I were solely concerned with your welfare." Parker snorted. "Before interrupting us in that manner, did you even consider the possibility? Do you not recognize the selfishness and childishness of that?" I contracted my mandible. "Childish? Is it selfish?" My voice was perilously low. "I have sustained this family for more than a decade. All of you are egotistical, if anyone here is." Olivia crossed her arms, her voice gentle but tinged with poison. "You are exhibiting the characteristics of a victim. However, let's be honest. You are simply enraged that your parents did not leave you an inheritance, are you not?" My heart was filled with a ferocious coldness. I gradually rose, my eyes roving over each of their features. "I arrived at this location with the expectation that you had finally acknowledged your error." A sharp guffaw emanated from me. "Yet, this is not the case. You remain the same as the parasites. Unappreciative, selfish." My mother's voice was as keen as a blade, and she leapt from her seat. "Do not anticipate a warm reception upon your departure from that door." I halted at the doorway, my hand firmly grasping the latch. My voice was as frigid as ice as I turned my head and locked eyes with her. Initially, I did not experience a sense of acceptance in this location. Then, I opened the door and proceeded to walk away without glancing back. My heart was pounding against my ribcage as I drove home. I was uncertain as to their subsequent actions, however, I was certain that they would not relinquish the matter. As anticipated, upon my arrival at my residence, I was paralyzed. There was a tight closure on my door. The entire doorframe was coated with a thick layer of grayish-white expanding foam, which had solidified to a consistency similar to cement and spilled over the edges. An individual had purposefully undermined my residence. It was unnecessary for me to inquire as to who. Fury boiled in my veins as I tightened my grasp on my phone. My pulse was racing as I rewound the footage of my security camera application. He was present. He was smiling triumphantly as he held a can of expanding foam and sprayed it all over my door, wearing a gray hoodie and a baseball cap. My hands were clenched into fists. Did they truly believe they could intimidate me? Did they anticipate that I would return, pleading for mercy? False. I was not allowing them to get away with this. I stood in front of my sealed door, my respiration heaving with fury. I was no longer astounded by their actions, nothing could possibly surprise me anymore. However, I was incensed. Their arrogance, rather than their juvenile antics, is the reason. The pure stupidity of believing that they could do this and not experience any repercussions. I reopened the security app and proceeded to rapidly advance through the footage. Parker appeared on the screen, as I had anticipated. I recognized his lazy gait, despite the fact that he was wearing a gray hoodie and had his cap drawn low to conceal his face. I recognized the arrogant grin as he directed the nozzle toward my door, filling every nook and cranny with foam. Each movement was a form of reproach. He did this because he believed that I would not respond. He was mistaken. I calmly saved the video, captured clear screenshots of his visage, and promptly contacted the police. A youthful police officer was stationed in front of my apartment 30 minutes later. His demeanor was a blend of professionalism and sympathy. I presented him with the footage, providing a detailed explanation of the situation. He inquired, "Do you wish to submit a formal complaint?" His tone was neutral but uncertain, as if he were anticipating that I would disregard the matter. I amused myself with a chilly laugh. You were not summoned to this location for a cordial conversation. Flipping open his notebook to commence an official report, he nodded. Parker. Is that your brother, correct? My voice was ice frigid as I met his gaze. No longer. My father contacted me the following morning. Father. Sophia, my dear, is it truly necessary for this to escalate to this extent? I am. Are you contacting to request that I cancel the charges? Father. It is not that. It is merely. You are aware that Parker was simply unhappy. He did not intend to cause any injury. I am. Scoffs. What if I had an essential meeting this morning? He sealed my door shut, Dad, so there was no harm. What if I had an infant or a cat inside? Father. Silence. I am. He believed that he could intimidate me. I will demonstrate to him that he selected the incorrect individual. Father. Would you truly like to pursue this matter to this extent? I am. It is not my fault. Parker executed this action. His actions were imprudent and irresponsible, and he should not have pursued them if he did not desire results. Father. What charges do you wish to eliminate? Me. $33,000. Father. What is the matter? I am. This includes the cost of repairing my door, legal fees in the event that the situation continues, and damages for harassment. I would argue that this is a reasonable figure. Father. This constitutes extortion. I am. Coldly chuckled. No, Father, this is the result. Father. Parker does not possess that amount of money. I am. Once this occurs, you and your mother can provide him with assistance. You have stood in for him throughout his entire existence, this is merely another instance. Father. The Sophia was grasped by Claudine. You are causing this family to disintegrate. I am. Long ago, this family broke apart. My account received precisely $33,000 3 days later, which was transferred from my parents' joint account. My mother did not send any communications, and Parker did not lodge any complaints. Olivia, who delighted in the opportunity to be spiteful, maintained an unequivocal silence. They believed that shipping the money would cause me to disappear. However, they failed to comprehend this. I no longer required them. I stood in front of my apartment door, which had been entirely repaired, and ran my fingers over the smooth surface. The $33,000 was not the most significant factor. It was crucial that they were compelled to accept responsibility for their actions for the first time. They may harbor animosity toward me and refer to me as a traitor. However, for the first time in my life, they were unable to compel me to comply. I took a drink of wine and smirked. They believed that they could incapacitate me. However, they ultimately suffered the consequences. I believed that they would ultimately desist from harassing me after I sent the $33,000. However, I had accorded them an excessive amount of credit. One was the loss of money. Am I losing control? They were incapable of managing that. Then, when they were unable to manipulate me with their customary methods, they resorted to foul play. It commenced with an influx of hypocritical messages from remote relatives, whose visages I could scarcely recall. Sophia, Aunt Susan, I am deeply disheartened by your actions. Your parents dedicated their entire existence to your care, and this is the way you repay them? Uncle Mark, Sophia, do not allow money to rob you of your humanity. Please bear in mind that family is eternal. Cousin Rachel, I am astounded that you are so callous as to abandon your parents in this manner. They are on the brink of losing their residence, do you not experience any sense of remorse? I perused each message with a mixture of amusement and revulsion. I was aware of the individual responsible for this. Mother, she was unable to prevail against me through rational argument, therefore, she employed the apprehension of social criticism to launch an attack on me. She had concocted an entirely new narrative. One in which I was the ungrateful daughter, abandoning my aging parents. I was so ruthless and selfish that I deprived them of all financial assistance, thereby putting them in danger of losing their property. A sob story that is flawless. With the exception of one issue. It was inaccurate. For more than a decade, I had been responsible for their financial obligations. I had funded Parker and Olivia, paid their mortgage, and covered their expenses. Without ever requesting anything in return. They were not abandoned. They had exploited me. I had completed my task. Logging into Facebook, I initiated the process by opening my laptop. I was not a frequent poster, however, today could be an exception. I no longer required their affection. I simply required them to relinquish their capacity to manipulate the truth. Each word appeared on the screen in sharp, clear detail, as my fingertips swiftly moved across the keyboard, leaving no room for deception. My parents never genuinely adored me, despite my efforts to be a good daughter. For more than a decade, I provided my parents with hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund their mortgage, bills, and even my siblings' tuition. I never voiced any complaints, as I was of the opinion that families should provide mutual support. However, when my parents drafted their will, they bequeathed everything to Parker and Olivia. When I inquired as to why, they responded that it was unnecessary for me to have it, as I had a career. They referred to me as egotistical when I objected. They labeled me a traitor when I ceased providing them with financial support. Currently, they are disseminating false information that I have abandoned them, that they are on the brink of losing their property, and that I am a heartless individual. Daughter. The truth is as follows. They are not losing their residence, rather, they are forfeiting the complimentary financial assistance that I have rendered for several years. I am not sharing this to garner sympathy, rather, I am sharing it to inform anyone else who has been exploited by their own family. You are not obligated to continue to endure the pain. Refusing to be utilized is not betrayal, and establishing boundaries is not an act of ungratefulness. Occasionally, family is not defined by bloodline, but rather by those who genuinely revere and appreciate you. I have disengaged from their existence. Also, I have no remorse. I submitted the message. The post garnered thousands of comments and hundreds of shares within an hour. A few individuals expressed their encouragement. I have been in your position, remain resolute. You are not obligated to pay them anything. You have already accomplished an abundance of tasks. Your courage in speaking out is truly commendable. Other individuals were extremely critical. Although family members may be defective, they remain family. Do not expose your dirty linens to the elements in this manner. She is merely seeking attention. It is disheartening to publicly humiliate one's own parents in this manner. I was indifferent. I anticipated this outcome. My mother contacted me 3 hours after I disclosed the truth. Mother. Sophia, what are you doing? I am speaking the truth in a composed manner. Mother. Your actions are having a detrimental impact on the reputation of this family. I am. No, Mother. At the moment you resolved to transform me into the antagonist of your narrative, you accomplished that. Mother. You will ultimately come to regret this decision. I am. False. You will be the one to suffer the consequences. I terminated the call, experiencing an unprecedented sense of liberation. They were unable to conceal the truth any longer. For the first time, I had regained my voice. I had never felt so liberated in the 3 months following the revelation of the truth. There will be no more burdensome phone calls or guilt-tripping messages. I was no longer susceptible to manipulation by anyone. I was finally living for myself. Initially, the emptiness was peculiar. The loss of a family. Regardless of the severity of the toxicity. Nevertheless, a peculiar vacuum was left. However, I soon came to the realization. It was not a defeat. It was liberation. The turmoil of my past was abandoned as I devoted myself to my professional endeavors. My income was all mine, as no one was sapping it in its entirety. I enrolled in a photography course, something that I had never been willing to allocate time for in the past. I embarked on a journey to explore the destinations that I had previously postponed due to my obligations to my family. 3 months later, I was in Paris, enjoying coffee by the Seine. 6 months later, I stood atop Machu Picchu, savoring the powerful wind that swept through the ancient ruins. For the first time in my life, I bore no responsibility for anyone but myself. Additionally, it was more valuable than any inheritance. I no longer followed them. However, news of my former family continued to reach me through old acquaintances and community murmurs. My mother had secured employment as a waitress at a modest cafeteria. She was observed by a former colleague who commented that she no longer exuded the same demeanor as the woman who had previously directed me. She was no longer investing in designer clothing or leisure treatments. My father, who had maintained his silence throughout my ordeals, was currently employed as a laborer at a construction supply store. He was no longer able to depend on anyone to pay his expenses on his behalf. Parker was not employed. He had laughed at me as I departed, but now, there was no one left to provide funding for his failed startup ventures. Olivia was still ensnared in her delusion, frantically striving to become a social media celebrity. However, her excursions were no longer being funded by anyone. No one was purchasing her designer attire to display on Instagram. My complete family was experiencing hardship. However, I did not experience any sense of remorse. I had afforded them an opportunity, and they destroyed it through their own avarice. Alex and I encountered each other 1 year later. I had never been in search of affection. However, he entered my life in a gentle breeze, without any expectations or demands. He differed from the individuals I had encountered previously. He was not an individual who solely regarded me in terms of the benefits I could provide. He caught sight of me, genuinely observed me. We encountered each other during a trekking excursion with mutual acquaintances. Initially, I believed that he was a mere passing stranger, like all others. Then, he listened patiently, never requiring anything from me, except for my presence. For the first time in my life, I did not sense the necessity to demonstrate my value. I was not required to purchase affection. I was only required to be myself. On a December evening, I gazed downward from the veranda of my apartment, where the city lights were aglow. I was no longer under the control of anyone. I was no longer exploited by anyone. I no longer required my previous family. I once believed that being excluded from the will was a form of betrayal and degradation. However, I have since come to the realization. It was the most exceptional gift they had ever bestowed upon me. Sophia's narrative is not merely a narrative of family betrayal. The journey of an individual who once believed that affection and recognition could be achieved through sacrifice. The reality is that a significant number of individuals are ensnared in a cycle of being exploited by the very individuals who are supposed to hold them in the highest regard. However, this narrative demonstrates that establishing boundaries is not self-serving. It is self-respect. Occasionally, the loss of a problematic family is not a loss. It is a chance to discover the people who genuinely appreciate you, as well as freedom and happiness. What are your thoughts on Sophia's narrative? Have you ever encountered a situation that is as similar as this or know someone who has? Please express your opinions in the comments section. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for additional heartfelt, startling, and authentic narratives about family and life.